I'm delighted to be able to introduce Tina today. Tina is a New Zealand of Te Aotearoa, Ngati Tu Wharatua, Ngati Rangatahi Matakora and Pākehā descent. In 2010, her book of short stories, Once Upon a Time in Aotearoa, won the inaugural fiction prize at the Ngākapu Ora Māori Awards. Her first novel, Where the Rakahu Bone Sings, was longlisted for the 2014 Ngākapu Ora Aotearoa Māori Book Award for Fiction. An anthology of Māori and Pacifica fiction that she edited with Iti Wimehera called Black Marks on the White Page was published in 2017. And then the two books that we're largely going to be talking about today, The Imaginary Lives of James Poneka was published in 2018, and The Mires, Tina's most recent book that's only just been published in its UK edition, was a finalist for the Jan Medlicott Acorn Prize for Fiction at the 2025 I can't remember which prize it is. Thank you, New Zealand Book Awards, yeah. She has just released as well a book of essays and memoir called This Compulsion in Us. And if I can break your confidence, she was expressing some slight regret at some of the content of that yesterday. So there's a teaser for you.
Yeah, all memoirists should regret, shouldn't, but probably do.
Yeah, and so just before you came over, This Compulsion in Us won the General Non-Fiction Award at the New Zealand Book Awards. So Tina is an award-winning short storyist, novelist, and writer of essay and memoir. She teaches creative writing at the International Institute of Modern Letters, Te Arenga Waka University, Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. So I've mentioned these two books, and we are going to talk about the Mires in the main. But I wanted to start by asking Tina first a kind of question. It's a question that Māori ask one another a lot, and I've been warned that the answer could become very expansive. Māori identity is very much predicated on genealogy, on knowing who you are in terms of who you're related to and the wider sphere of relations that you come from. So I just wanted to ask you, Tina, if you could tell us a little bit about your literary genealogy.
Well, kia ora, and kia ora everyone. Thank you for having me in York. Thank you for coming to this talk. It's really exciting to talk to people outside of my own country. Yes, and genealogy, so we call that whakapapa, and yeah, it goes back to before the beginning of time, so we probably don't have time for that today. But our first stories are of a creation whakapapa, so creation genealogy, and it is a genealogical story of how everything came to be. And actually in one of those essays, I kind of liken it to the Big Bang, and you can kind of actually put those two stories beside each other and they actually make sense in relation to each other. So you can imagine, there's the nothing before creation, and we tell it as a genealogy, as a story. And so when I talk about storytelling, I have to start there. I'm not going to go further than that though, but let's zoom into almost the present day. So from that time, actually, I'm going to go back a bit. Before white people came to Aotearoa, New Zealand, we had a literature that was oral, that was visual in terms of carving and weaving and skin, tattooing. So we had many ways of telling stories, of course. And then when English literature came, I'm doing the quick version, we started using that medium almost immediately. So we very quickly took up the pen because here's this exciting new technology, and very quickly became letter writers and actually very quickly left the country to see who these people were who had come. So actually the Imaginary Lives of James Poneka is based on that early expansive kind of, who are these people? We'll go back to their place and see who they are. 1960s, 1970s, we get our first Māori writers in English who are kind of considered in the same groupings as the New Zealand Pākehā or white settler writers. And they were people like Hone Tūwhare, Witi Ihi Maira, who you just named, who I did an anthology with, Patricia Grace, and then there's J.C. Sturm. So there's a lot of, a handful of writers that came through for probably a good 30 to 40 years, and in some ways still dominant, that group of writers. Still our senior writers, still with us, many of them. And I didn't pop up until, really zoom fast forward now, I didn't pop up till 2010. And at that point, the really interesting thing was we'd had writers in English in the literary scene so that is 40 or so years by then. But it was years before I met another Māori writer. So it was still very isolated. I was still very, I guess, kind of felt alone in what I was doing. I did meet other student writers like myself, but also, I guess what I mean is writers at events like this, or writers at writing events, or there'd be one book every few years. So I came in, and that's the era I came in, and I had, I guess James Pōneke was the end of that decade, and then the Mires, I'll show you the UK version. The Mires is post-2020, and what's happened post-2020, where I'll end this introduction to our literature, is I counted up, we've had more than 20, I think up to 25 new Māori writers since 2020. And when I say new Māori writers, I mean writers with a single author name book. We have many more than that actually who are writing smaller things. So we've had this huge burst since 2020. In my decade, there might have been 5 or 6. In the decade before that, there might have been, again, 5 or 6. And then suddenly, post-2020, this is a very interesting question for me, what's happened recently. Hopefully that thing with whakapapa is it does grow eventually, yeah.
Absolutely, and one hopes that the more people see in the scene, the more people feel like it is their scene to join in with. But yeah, I wonder what happened in 2019, 2020 that gave people time to write. Yeah.
I need someone to do a PhD on that topic.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful, thank you very much. So let's jump into James Pōneke. So this was the first book of yours that I read. And the reason I was drawn to it was because I was working at the time on Indigenous travellers to Europe, which is exactly what this book does. It brings us to Europe through the eyes of a young boy called James Pōneke, who is orphaned in New Zealand, ends up living with missionaries, is kind of befriended by an English artist, has, as you say, always had this curiosity about the English and where they came from. And so when the English artist says to him, "You come back to England with me," he agrees to that. And adventures in London ensue, some of them very educational, and some of them really quite damaging. And I think the first question I want to ask you really is, what drew you to that particular subject matter, to this incredible journey in probably the 1840s, early 1840s, from New Zealand to England through this young man?
Well, I think writing is quite often happy accidents. So I was finishing a book I don't have with me today, but my previous novel, Where the Rekohu Bone Sings, and I was in the library and I saw the biography, and I'm going to forget the name of the author, of Sarah Baartman, just sitting on the shelf. And Sarah Baartman, I don't know if you know the name, but she was the Khoikhoi woman from South Africa who was brought to England and exhibited in a really horrific way. And she was exhibited in France. She was horribly mistreated, and she was she was treated as a curiosity because of her body shape and her difference from white people, and also exhibited after her death. The thing about that shocked me, other than that's shocking, is that I'd done a degree in anthropology, I'd done a master's in creative writing, I was finishing my PhD in creative writing, and I'd never heard that we exhibited human beings alive, and that was quite common. And so as an Indigenous person interested in museums and indigeneity and our stories, I thought, why don't we know this? And one of the basis for my PhD was that when there's a history that's not well known, one of the best ways to talk about it is to tell stories about it, rather than not just history books, but actually novels, because people remember stories. So hopefully imaginative stories would help people remember. But that story wasn't my story. I couldn't recreate the story of a South African Khoikhoi woman from that era. But what I did think was, what would one of my ancestors, what would a Māori person have seen if they came to London? And the first idea that kind of started the book was that seemed like a really savage thing to do to me, to exhibit a human being, and yet we were called savages. And so I thought, what would happen if we turned the eye back on Victorian London? And then another happy accident happened, which is I went to a symposium where they were talking about these Māori people who left very soon after the ships started arriving in New Zealand. They started getting on the ships and going back to England. And I heard about this young man that was actually taken by an artist called George French Angus to London to be exhibited. Really, really slightly different circumstances than Sarah Bartman, in that he did come for, in some way, as an exchange. He wanted English education. He wanted to find out what it was like here. But that was where the story came from. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, so you've started answering this question already. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what fiction allows you to do that the kind of historical or anthropological account of the same story wouldn't have allowed you to do.
Yeah, I think it's just getting behind the eyes of the character, and so it was very important that this was a first person account for me from a Māori person and what they saw, and yes, I guess creating characters for people to fall in love with or fall in hate with, and at least be compelled by and want to follow their story. But also what it does for me is allow me to get into the nuance of that, because I had this idea, okay, the Māori young man goes to London and sees how terrible it is. But of course it's not that simple. He also fell in love with the education of English. He fell in love with the big city. He wanted to know these things. He had relationships with local people. And so what I learned through writing the book was that it's always more nuanced than him. I kind of, in my head, I kind of phrased it as he's turning the savage eye back on London. But actually it became much more complex than that. And so for me, as an Indigenous person, it became about how we are sometimes complicit in the things that are done to us as a people by, I guess, in many ways, there's no way around it. So I'm not saying there's fault anywhere, but we choose to engage sometimes in things that end up being bad for us. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And that entry into London, so you're going to read a short section from that moment in the book. So maybe we could do that first. So this is where James is arriving in London after he's been displaced multiple times in New Zealand. This is another kind of major journey, and over to you.
Okay. We arrived in the city of London in March 1846. We had entered the Thames from the great wide of the sea, and as we drew near to the city, the ships and buildings began to gather together more thickly. At times I wondered how we navigated through as the estuary narrowed and became the river proper. Every size and style of boat made its way haphazardly to its destination, and all seemed to understand the rules of their game. There were near misses, small craft turning speedily away from the crushing weight of the large and lumbering. I sought out views of villages and gatherings of people on the shores, but the closer we came, the more my view was obscured by the many masts and sails. At first, I must admit, I may have felt a little disappointed. In my mind, London shone like polished pounamu, that's greenstone or jade. It was clean and bright like the prized feathers of the kortuku, the white heron. There would be no dirt there, I thought, no hard labour of the kind we were accustomed to, just people thinking fine thoughts and having fine conversations, if the artist's descriptions of his hometown were true. Instead, what crept up on me felt like a sickness. As buildings gained height and solidity, brick upon brick reaching higher and further afield than I had ever seen, I felt overwhelmed by the city's vast size, not shining, but brown and black and grey, and built so far up into the sky, how not to get dizzy at such heights? This was my first view of London, a beast of smoke and stone, populated by insects running, following on. As we came in, the city swarmed, overtaking the river and fields beyond. Still, the size and multitude of so many sails and buildings also grew a great excitement in me. I felt my heart and my chest and my stomach swirling as much as my vision. Oh my, how it filled me with dread and excitement. Closer in, I felt the air change, the sky closed. As we approached the main docks, I feared how the city went on and on. There must have been more people than in all of New Zealand and Australia too. And it didn't seem natural, all of them living atop one another, all eating and cooking and making fire and defecating and dying in this one place, because I could smell that too. The great river Thames carried with it the stench of a latrine and the potent hint of putrescence. It was an assault on my senses and a shock to my sensibilities. No river in my land would be treated thus, for water carries all life. And no person would dare transgress that with bodily pollution. This by itself was enough to churn my stomach. The crewmen seemed excited as they worked and laughed about what delights awaited them at home, but I was not sure whether I had entered a realm of gods or demons. The impossibility of it crowded my senses. Why so many windows and so few doors, and why were all those windows closed upon the world? Those houses, those factories, row upon wretched row, the streets thronging. How did anyone find their way in such a horde? How could they all be fed? And how could they all speak to one another? The sound, even from where we sailed on the wide river, was a rumble like the far-off signal of a thunderstorm. But this was constant. Some part of me knew this sound would infect my dreams for the rest of my life. I do not think I overplay my impressions. I hold this memory as distinct as the episode of my mother's dying. Perhaps I had come into some sort of fever as we arrived, for it was a kaleidoscope, a panorama. But then a kind of wonder overtook my horror. The dome of St. Paul's had come more clearly into view, no longer a wide smudge among the confusion, but a perfect dome, grey-green, crowned by something so yellow I had to look again. Gradually I grew certain it was a cross atop a golden ball. There it was amongst the chaos, God's perfection made manifest by men. It filled my chest with awe, and I thought I glimpsed, if only momentarily, why the tribes of England flocked here. Was it possible to glimpse the divine in the commotion and insanity of such a place? Were my ears too underdeveloped to hear the music within the roar? I knew I was not yet the equal of this mystery, and I made it my business to understand.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful, and so there are so many kind of aspects of that you've touched on. The thing that one of the things that's so striking is literacy. You know, if you look at the British press at this moment in time, the way Indigenous people are being portrayed is still is very much living in a pre-literate age, and without the facility even to produce literature. And here you have a very refined voice, a very a beautiful kind of eloquent speaker. Was that really important to you to make sure that you presented an Indigenous man who could absolutely hold himself in this kind of space?
So the character is completely made up, but aspects of his life are based on a real person, and the accounts of that real person, some of them appeared in the London Illustrated News, and he was, people thought he was a Englishman pretending to be a native man because he was so articulate. They would say things like, he does as well as any English boy and speaks as well, and so the real person certainly made an impression on London because he was so well spoken. And as I say, as soon as the written word arrived in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Māori people took it up with great gusto and were like, yeah, we're going to use this great tool. And just, I kind of wanted, I think that's much more interesting, isn't it, than that, because it defies that expectation we have that there was some kind of, the whole era was really about this hierarchy of man, where the most developed people were the white people, and all other peoples were somewhere on the scale of intelligence, and it just didn't prove true in any way of any of the people that were, and a great number of different people from around the world were brought to London to be exhibited. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And that, you've mentioned looking at his accounts, did you use any of that wider archive as well? Because there are some incredible first-person accounts by Indigenous travellers of, I said to you yesterday when we were talking about this, or the day before, that the way he enters London, I feel like I've read that in different voices, in different places, that there's a really beautiful kind of capturing of that sense of surprise and horror almost about what they're encountering.
Thank you. I must have, but I certainly was reading about all the different people coming in, and and that was the general sense of being told this grand place and then discovering it's not quite. Yeah.
Thank you. And maybe this could be a segue into moving on to the Mires, but another aspect of this book that is really powerful and original in the wider pantheon of kind of Indigenous literatures is this incredible journey that he undertakes, is the mobility from New Zealand to Britain, and that travel movement is a really fundamental part of your work, and of course the sort of stereotypical notion of what indigeneity represents is often cast in terms of people who are place-bound, who are sort of in one place for multiple generations, but you always have your characters travelling and living in different places, and I wondered if you could just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think going back to whakapapa, or where our stories come from, my experience of being a Māori Indigenous person is not one of being in one place, and I think as contemporary Indigenous people we often think, oh, we're different from our ancestors, but actually going back, my ancestors responded to colonisation by migrating. So the home places I go back to now are not the home places. I originally come from a place called Taranaki. I don't know if anyone knows Aotearoa, New Zealand, but my ancestors all migrated down to Wellington and down into the top of the South Island. So that's where I go home to. So I belong to Taranaki, but it's quite away from actually where I go home to. And before that, of course, we only got to New Zealand, even though we were the Indigenous peoples of New Zealand, are. We only got there through a massive migration through the Pacific. That is quite an incredible migration through the different islands. So mobility, I think one of the reasons why Māori people specifically, I can't speak for any other group, but held to belong into one place, especially from, I guess, what we call the Māori Renaissance, or when we were kind of reclaiming our status and reclaiming our identity after the most, I guess, extreme colonial events, was to claim a piece of land, and it was partly in resistance to the people that were trying to take that land. But actually, our places are as often, and Indigenous people around the world do have this, where we moved around a lot. We didn't just stay on one plot. That's not natural for a lot of people to do, and a lot of our places are also on the ocean, so there's no staying in one spot on the ocean. It's so it's shoreline, Yeah,
thank you. I suppose another aspect of the stories of travel that really resounds in your writing is resilience. That these are characters who kind of grow in strength and self-assurance, I suppose, through their travelling. If we could move to the Mires, where we see this again in different ways. So we're jumping here from the 1840s to the near future, and we're leaving Britain to come back to New Zealand, but with a family of Europeans. So it's a novel that among other themes, deals with climate refugeeism and migration in that sense. So maybe let's try and find a box and ask you how you see the book in terms of genre. Did you see it as speculative fiction? Did you see it as social realism? How do you
I think
figure it?
I saw it as set in around 2030. I was writing it in 2022. So in that way, it's speculative, but only a tiny bit. And then I think it might, I don't know whether it has on the back of the UK cover, but on the back of the American cover, it has magic realism, which is, so I don't really do genre, and it's not really, like, I don't mind what you call it. I think the publishers like to call it something so that people will buy it. There are things that people would consider non-realist, particularly, actually it kind of frames it. The frame is, in Indigenous terms and in Māori terms, these things are not non-realist. So the swamp is a voice, speaks to, the swamp is the narrator. And then some things happen towards the end of the novel that I might get into in this session if we've got time, where, I don't know, sometimes time and there's this very special child at the centre of this book where she's 14. Again, it's quite hard for me to go, oh, that's speculative, because it is. Like, it's all speculative. Everything we write is, we're just making stuff up. But at the same time, what other people might see as kind of magical realism, I'm kind of like, I know kids like this. Maybe not the way I've described it, but have these... I thought of her name's Wairere. She's, there's 3 families in the book. She's, one of those families is Māori, one is a Pākehā or white settler, and one is a refugee family from Europe. I saw her as just having access to more senses, because even in Western science now, we know there are other senses that we have, not just 5, not just the visual, hearing, all of those things, but we have other ways of feeling and sensing the world. And so I just kind of gave her a really amped up sensory engagement with the world, particularly with the swamp mother. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So in this novel, there are 3 families whose lives are intertwined. This family of refugees from Europe who arrive in this small town and are neighbours with a Māori woman who is also an incomer. She's lived elsewhere and has come into town with her 2 young children, and then a settler family, a white New Zealand family, mother and son at this point in time, and the interactions between the 3 of them kind of drive the narrative. But if we start with the climate displacement, that ecological breakdown that brings about this coming together of these families, I wonder if you could maybe situate that in terms of the sorts of conversations that were happening at the time you wrote it, and that you hope readers might have as a result of reading it. They're fleeing something called the Great Heat.
Yeah, shall I read that section?
Sure, yeah. Why not?
The reason being, so there's a little section I was going to read so it's Sarah and Adam are going to end up in New Zealand eventually in this neighbourhood. And I'm just going to read a little bit from it, but in this little bit there are some facts and figures, and all of them were taken from the European summer of 2022. So while I was writing this, it was winter in New Zealand, and the news was coming in, actually not just Europe, but China as well. You're having all those heat waves. And so not the outcome of the facts and figures, but when I say some numbers in here, those are taken from the news. And so it's supposed to be futuristic, but I was so shocked by those numbers, I thought they would stand in for, it's not unusual. Anyway, see what you think. She doesn't really remember a summer without the fires. She was 22 or 23 the year they survived 4 heat waves in a single summer. For 10 days in a row, the daytime temperature hit 47 degrees or more. Wildfires spread for 30,000 hectares, destroying 2 towns, roads, farmland, forest. Their city hadn't been in the path of the fire itself, but fire needs a lot of oxygen, and smoke fills a lot of space. They lived under blazing skies for weeks and, in the end, counted 6,502 heat-related deaths in 3 months. The number seared in her memory because she had wondered how that could possibly be true. There was no memorial, no public outcry, no collective decision to change things. They started publicity campaigns for the heat sicknesses, COPD, asthma, heat stroke, buy your air filters, stay inside, breathing exercises, stress reduction, tinfoil on the windows, water in the bath. Protect yourself from the great heat, they said, as if it were a limited event, as if there were any protection to be had. They just went on with life, surviving the storms that came. Her cousin Linny worked with support services and told her stories, but even she treated each incident as isolated. That's all they could do, she'd said, deal with things case by case. In their city, it was business as usual, each store and business owner stubbornly continuing no matter what. There was nothing dramatic enough to put an end to business, no outward sign that suggested panic was the correct response. She can see now how they couldn't have imagined it. Not really. They'd seen it was bad, but they thought they'd all get through in the end. After all, they'd always been there. They'd always found a way. At first, the local governments of each district would call a state of emergency only 1 or 2 weeks a year, then 1 or 2 months a year. People were hopeful these conditions were temporary, and wasn't a little more heat pretty nice, really? All they had to do was find ways to live with it. After that, there were evacuation seasons. In summer, Sarah and Adam would go north to the sea if they could, or to family if all the holiday homes were taken. Eventually, there weren't any spare holiday homes, or mobile homes, or tent sites. The permanent evacuations began soon after. I might end there, but that's a bleak place to end. It does get more hopeful. It's a hopeful book, I've been told. So we'll hopefully get to that part.
Well, they travel through Britain, right? They travel through camps in Britain.
Yes.
I mean, I suppose that in some senses that's the thing that's driving my question about what kind of conversations you hope readers might have, because we're we're at a moment politically where there's a lot of tension
Yeah.
over exactly these kinds of issues, not around climate refugeeism explicitly, but the kind of movements
Yes.
that we're seeing in the world.
Yeah. And it's more intense here because you're connected by land. But for me, the impetus for having that conversation and writing about refugee characters is because my country is not pulling its weight, and we're depending on your perspective, luckily surrounded by a massive moat. So it's quite hard to get people to our country, but we're not welcoming people as much as we could. We have one of the lowest rates of bringing refugee people in, which we didn't used to. We've just kind of let the numbers stay the same. So writing about it for me was a matter of we don't see conversations between Indigenous people and refugee or immigrant populations. We don't, let alone white people as well. And I just thought, like, what I've always been interested in that and how we look after each other. So I wanted to talk about that, but this group come through. They kind of have to go either north or south, and they really want to get to New Zealand, but they come through a kind of waiting station in Britain, which is a refugee. I can't remember what I call it, but it's in an airplane hangar, and it's kind of brutal. But that's kind of what happens to many populations in the world. I also think kind of at some point with the environment, it could be any of us, right? It could happen to any of us. So they come to New Zealand, which is cooler, but we have these increasing storms every year now, which are so we get a lot of water now. We're flooding a lot. We're not having these massive heat waves so much, but we're getting a lot of floods and a lot of hurricanes, which is not something we used to have. Tornadoes are one of those big weather systems.
Yeah, I was actually going to move on to that, because you talked about some people telling you that this is about hope, but of course they arrive in New Zealand to escape the great heat and pretty much land in the middle of a major weather event where coastal communities are being displaced by rising waters. They themselves are wondering if their own coastal community is going to become vulnerable. So yeah, I wondered, like, there's no sense that there's respite at the end of this movement, and maybe we could reflect a bit more on that question of the sort of dystopian versus hopeful possibilities of this story.
Well, I don't want to go straight to the reading at the end,
No.
but so the hope comes with the children, which is like, oh, that sounds nice, but it wasn't an obvious thing. But Wairere, this young woman who's really connected to the water, there's a lot about the swamp, and the swamp's job is to clean things up, right? There's this lovely body of water out here, and all the plants are there to filter out the gunge and filter out the darkness. So there's a kind of, I don't know if it was purposeful, but in the end, at the end of a book, you find out what the book is about, and the book is about that kind of the ability to look to the that all the answers are there. We just have to do the job, like creating a body of water that cleans itself, and so Wairere's connection to that means that she can see, because we'll have to talk about the Connor in a minute. The bad people of the world, are also kind of linked, kind of like the bad environmental problems, and yeah, I will stop talking. Ask me another question.
Yeah, well, no. So before and we will come to Wairere again. But so before we get there, I suppose the other note of hope is in the building of connection between people, like community, solidarity, mothers coming together. So Kerry and Selma have
Sarah.
have young children of the same age. The children start playing with one another, the mothers start talking to one another, and they start to build a bond that eventually also manages to bring in the older white neighbour who is fairly racist, but ultimately in need of the kind of community that they offer as well.
So again, the wonderful thing about writing a book is you don't know what it's going to tell you, what you're going to find out. And I thought I was writing a book about extremism, white supremacy, which we haven't even touched on yet, and this problem with how we look after each other or don't, and environmental problems. That's a lot of stuff to put in a book, but what it turned out to be about is friendship, actually. So that was the lovely thing for me. Usually going into writing a book is about like starting with a question rather than starting with all the answers. So to put a whole lot of stuff into a book and to get an answer back, which is friendship, and I was like, oh yay, like I hadn't planned to write about friendship, but I guess it is a story about community, and those three families are not naturally connected at the beginning.
Absolutely. And actually the point of disjuncture that's most clear is precisely through this other character, Connor, who is the son of Janet, the white neighbour. And Connor is seeking community in a very different way, right? So Connor is spending his life online in what people much younger than me call the manosphere, being influenced in very direct ways by extremism, by conspiracy theorists, becoming increasingly a supremacist, a white supremacist. This group will, by violence, take New Zealand back from the incomers. You said that was kind of what you thought you were writing about originally, and other things have kind of taken over, but that's still very much at the centre of this story. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about what drove you to go there, like why you felt that was a story that had to be told in this context.
It's really interesting talking about it now. It's only 4 years later. I think I probably thought about the book for a few years before I wrote it, and I'll take you back. I guess it was 2018. I was thinking about the book. I was watching what was happening overseas. There was a lot of this terrorist, anti-certain groups of people rhetoric that then turned in, that the actual terrorists tended to be white supremacists. And I thought it's only a matter of time before it happens here in sweet little New Zealand, which is a horrible thing to think, and then it happened. And I was like, I do not like being that, and it's not that I've got super sense in any way, it's just that if you're paying attention, you would have noticed things getting more fractious between racial groups in this particular way. So we had a horrible terrorist attack on the mosques in Christchurch, where I now live, it was a horrific deaths occurred. And so the book I was going to write, I didn't write. So I was going to write a book where an attack like that happened. And I went kind of back to, okay, I'm still going to deal with that threat, but at a much quieter level, because once something like that happens, and many of you will have experienced things like that happening in your own country or wherever you're from, I didn't want to profit even artistically, because you don't make any money, but profit artistically from something like that happening. But I did think the tensions are there and they need to be dealt with, and we need to have the conversation. Sorry, what was the question again? I've kind of talked myself.
No, that's fine. I mean, just thinking about why you felt that needed to be talked about.
So that is why, and then I started just thinking about this problem which we're all facing, right? We're all facing this problem, and the manosphere. Never heard of that word until this year, maybe. Like, that wasn't a thing then. Now it's mainstream. So in 2022, I was writing this and I was thinking it had already happened. The worst thing that I could imagine had already happened. But I thought, those pressures are still there, those tensions are still there. And I was trying to move forward. And then we had another thing happen, which is that, and the same thing happened in the US and maybe here, which is the people occupying oh God, I'm going to get it wrong, but in New Zealand what it was people occupying our parliament grounds. And it had just happened in the US. I don't know if an equivalent thing happened here where kind of extremist anti-vaxxer people were they actually took over our parliament grounds for a number of weeks. They lived there. They destroyed a lot of stuff. There was a lot of violence to people who were working in the area. I know businesses that went out of business. Suddenly, extremism was mainstream. And I'd kind of been writing what I thought was about extremism, but it wasn't extremism anymore. And now it's got a name. Like Manosphere is one of the names of it. Like it's so mainstream that our young people are just finding this stuff as normal. It's like what's considered normal in some areas. Yeah. I couldn't keep up, to be honest, with the slight future that I was trying to write.
Well, as you say, it's kind of, it's the future, but it's so very plausible based on what we're experiencing already. That so Connor is a nasty piece of work, having been entirely brainwashed and led by very nasty pieces of work, and this is where that theme of cleansing, I suppose, that you mentioned a little earlier, comes in. This is, Wairere has noticed Connor, where everyone else, other people don't see what he's doing, but she has the sense and understands that this man is a malevolent force of some kind. So maybe we could move to Wairere and leave the dystopia and push towards the hope. It's important to know, I think, that Wairere is called throughout the book shortened form Y, which is the word for water. Yeah. So we know if we pick up that linguistic key, we know from the start that she is deeply connected to the water.
And just to be clear, I wasn't just going, "Ooh, I'll be clever, I'll call her Y," although that was part of it. There's so many place names. Again, who has been to New Zealand or knows something about New Zealand? Yeah, so many place names start with Y, right? WAI. Y, so that means water of something, yeah. So lots of place names. Waitangi.
That her connection is clearly fueled by Māori understandings of relationality, of relationship to place and to the natural world. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how she relates to the environment that she's in. Maybe then we could move to the reading.
Sure. Yeah, okay. So she just kind of feels it from the inside, really. She enters natural bodies, all life, really. She kind of picks up on other people sometimes, which isn't very nice for her, so she has to be really careful. Someone said to me, in their terms, she seems autistic, and I was like, that's probably right. Like I'm that runs in my family as well, so I understand that kind of that sensitivity to what's happening around a person. So she's got kind of that going on, but also she has this other thing where she goes right inside the water microscopically sometimes, and so yeah, she's just like I say, she's a sensory. She can sense everything that's happening, and I think I was going to say something else about Connor, but I can't remember what it is right now. Oh, I was just going to say, you were saying he's a nasty guy, but I think the last thing I'll say about Connor, and again, maybe a source of hope, is that he just wants belonging. He just wants somewhere to belong to. And the books that I was reading in order to write this, I was trying to stay off the websites where these people have conversations because I didn't want to go there. And I was really, really lucky that some people had done that work already. Julia Ebner had written a book called Going Dark, The Secret Social Lives of Extremists, and Talia Lavin had written Cultural Warlords, My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. And so they'd gone into those chat rooms, so I didn't have to. So I just want to acknowledge. But what I found out from them is that it's all they're just looking for somewhere to belong. And I think that's a really important thing to come away with. He was easier to write and get to know after I got that. Yeah.
There's a kind of ethical conundrum in the book, isn't there? Really, in the sense that your characters can either kind of choose connection or they can choose fear.
That's right.
He chooses fear. He goes down that
Yeah.
route.
And he is presented with connection. He's presented with you will belong, and you will be. We will all admire you, and you will get what you've always wanted, which he didn't get from his family. Yeah.
Thank you. So yes, so maybe we could
Okay.
turn to.
So this
to
is
the last
from
reading.
right at the end. What do you need to know about this? It has been raining really heavily. Wairere has left the house, even though when Kiri wasn't looking, and she's gone out to a swamp, the swamp in the area. It's actually all based on a real swamp where I used to walk my dog. And there's a hide out there, a bird hide, where she's just there, out there. So water will come and you will think it will be soft, and you think it will be soft. You think it will be smooth and find its way around your things, your houses and cars and furniture, your gardens and windows and hope. You think it might carry away some sticks and birds and rubbish from the drains, but it won't touch your crockery and photos and family heirloom kete, your beds or your cupboards of food. But water can be the foot of an elephant, the horns of a moose, a herd of buffalo running from a lion. Water can be the Cody falling in the forest, a 2-ton truck, a whole stadium filled with 50,000 people screaming. Water can be the boulder, the cliff face, the whole mountain, the cold surface of the moon, a planet hurtling through space, the terrible gravity of a black hole, the crushing centrifugal force. Water can be a whole galaxy of stars, the density of them, their dazzling power. Water is life, and water can be death. Wairere slips between dimensions, her heartbeat following the rhythm of the water drumming down from the sky in waves. She leaves her physical body behind and joins the swamp, slipping all the way through its different parts, the bog, the estuary, the seepages and flushes, the lagoon. She works her way down the swales and into the runoff, through the stormwater drains and out into the neighbourhood. By the end of the day, she knows it all, every secret underground pathway that water can infiltrate, all the mires, earthly and human, all the places and ways to get stuck, the quicksands and the brokenness, the way water seeps through. By the end of the day, she has mastered how to flow with the water, how to run where it runs, how to attend to Swamp Mother's wishes, how to gather strength enough to realise her own. She finds she knows what to do. How could she not have seen it before? She sees what Connor is, how small he is, how small they all are really, how they only mean something in relation to each other. She sees how the things he thinks he wants only make him smaller, that if he keeps going that way, he will become as small as a molecule of the suffocating toxic algae that kills off rivers and fish, invertebrates and pet dogs, a poison to anything that touches it. Maybe he is already that. But she is with swamp now, and swamp is in flood, and no matter how toxic it gets, river sludge can be washed away. She is no longer scared of Connor and people like him. She is no longer scared of what she is. She thinks of her Nan and knows that somehow the old lady is still with her. They all are. For a long time she felt like she and her mum and Walty were all alone in the world, but they never have been. She feels so many others now, thrumming around her. They are ready to ride the flood waters with her. It's like Nan always told her, the right teachers are already there, and swamp is the place of gathering for them all. As the sky darkens, Wairere finds that she can still see. The water rises until she's submerged, but she doesn't feel wet or cold, nor can she feel the boundary between her and the swamp anymore. It's peaceful there, and she wishes she could stay like that, buzzing and flowing with life, reaching and tasting every place. She tells Swamp Mother all that she knows and all that she fears and everything she doesn't understand. Swamp Mother will know what to do with it, all the things she carries. She feels tremendous relief in the unburdening, but the message that comes back is that it's time to go back to that other life. It's time to go back and deal with the things that are in front of her, now that she knows how. All she has to do is step out into the flow. So she does. Water has been flooding through the hide all afternoon, and as soon as she steps out, the old wooden hut begins to splinter, shuddering sideways and collapsing. Y is surrounded by a swirl of old timber, so she reaches for a wide plank and pulls her upper body onto it, her feet kicking behind, and the water carries her. It moves with her body the way a horse moves with its rider, responding to the direction of her intent. And as they travel, they lift time with them, so that the swamp becomes what it has always been at every moment, primordial twitching ooze, prehistoric reptilian birdlands, ancient food storehouse, pātaka for the ancestors who rise out of the softening ground and join Wairere on her journey. Kia ora.
We're not going to tell you what happens. Yeah, you'll need to read the book. But thank you so much. It's so wonderfully evocative, and you can see why people have called this magical realism. Perhaps it's not, but you can see it, and but also you get from just that brief passage a real sense of the connection between Y and the swamp, and the knowledge that connection kind of embodies. We have probably a couple of minutes for audience questions if anybody does have a burning question that they'd like to ask Tina.
Thank you for speaking today, really appreciate it. You talk about, or it was mentioned that you write essays, short stories, novels. How do you determine what subject or what idea you have is expanded into different medias?
I don't have a very good answer, which is that it feels like it's an essay or it feels like it's a short story. Or for a novel, it's usually quite a big idea, thought. It's not necessarily, I don't believe you always need a big idea, but it feels like it's something that needs time and space. Like at the moment I'm thinking about time and space actually, and it's very much essay thoughts that are coming to me. So I want to speak, I guess, more directly about it. And yeah, fiction I kind of have to choose in a way. I have to kind of go, now I'm going to be in that headspace. Sorry, it's not a very good answer. There was, thank you. There's a question here too. Yeah.
Kia ora, Tina.
Kia ora.
Thank you very much. I'm a homesick Kiwi,
Oh.
and I was intrigued that James Pornaki's response to London was not so dissimilar from mine when I first saw it. I was wondering if I could press you a little bit about identity, I guess. So I've got a two-part question, just like my supervisor always used to say. The first was, you say that you belong in Taranaki, but you go home to Wellington and perhaps Nelson area, you know. So you seem to be putting belonging against, kind of pitting it against home. And I was wondering if they are, since you've... Yeah, and the second question was, I was wondering what importance the Pākehā part of your whakapapa held for you.
Okay, kia ora. No, sorry, I didn't mean to put them. They're both, I belong in both those places, but I wouldn't call Taranaki home. So because I don't go back, I don't have a place, I don't have that level of comfort. And as a dispossessed Māori person, it's taken me years. It's Picton, actually, Waikawa. another one of those Y places. Waikawa is my home place, but it took me years of going back there before I felt like it's home. So that's, and that's only a tiny bit, which we certainly don't have enough time for the rest. But yeah, I've got many, many connections like that where making it feel like home is slightly different than belonging there. I belong to about 6 iwi, probably 4.
Do you feel that belonging?
I do belong there, but I don't have a home place to go back to there. Like I don't have we call it keeping the home fires burning, ahi ka. I don't have that. My family's moved away, and it might be a generation or two since we've been there.
I guess I'm trying to unpack what belonging is.
In Māori terms, it never goes away. So we have a saying, he kākano o, and irangiati, I've forgotten the actual second part of the phrase, but irangiatia, from, I'm a seed from rangiatia, which is, again, like I said, we came from beyond the ocean. So I'm a seed from that place, and that never dies. That's what that means. So I can claim lots of land. Now I go back there and say who I am, and they will treat me like family. So that, in Māori terms, that never goes away. For the Pākehā side, that is really important to me as a writer and as a person, but mainly in that I've had that contentious upbringing, and it's probably more in my essays where I've gone into that, where it's actually allowed me to write about these relationships and about colonialism in a nuanced way, where it's about looking a bit deeper than one side or the other and trying to figure out how they connect. And it's always been very tense and contentious, and that's been really helpful to me as a writer, but probably as a person too, because you kind of get over certain stuff, because it's like you could be angry for every minute of the day if you chose to, you know? Yeah. Thank you. Well, we're out of
Do you want to
time.
wrap up?
Yeah.
Was there time for one more?
If it's quick.
Is there? Yeah.
If it's quick, thank you.
Thank you very much for beautiful insight into New Zealand life. Although this book has been described as magical realism, is that a misunderstanding on something that you've described as sensitivity is actually a real perceptive skill? It's a real experience, and it's now labelled as magic, or I've heard things described as scouting, where people are capable of going ahead of a journey on behalf of everybody else to sound out any potential dangers, and it's a very particular skill that is practiced. And I wondered if the things that have been labelled magical realism, which is a literary term, are actually the sensitivities that you're describing are real skills.
Yeah, I think so. So it's quite a long question, but my answer is quite quick. No, I think that's what I was suggesting as well, for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you ever so much, Tina, for putting up with my questions and for your lovely readings. Thank you for the great questions from the audience members. I'm sure many of you will be keen to get hold of a copy of the Mires. It's a fantastic book. Do please read it. And Tina's going to be downstairs at the Fox Lane stand signing some copies. So do please pick one up. Thank you ever so much for attending today's event. And I'm sure you'll be checking out the festival programme for what else is on. But I hope you enjoy other events that you attend. Thank you very much. And thank you to Tina.
Thank you. Thank you.